You are a bootstrapped company, and while your competitors had hundreds of crores in capital, you chose not to raise capital. In fact, if I'm not wrong, Boult was already doing 27-30 crores odd, and Noise was also a significant player in the market. So my question is, what are the strengths and weaknesses of building a bootstrap company?
बोल्ट co-founder वरुण गुप्ता।
अपने खास डिजाइन और इनोवेशन के बदौलत बोल्ट आज हर 7 सेकंड में एक हेडफोन की सेल करता है।
This is the story of the big journey.
Varun, how did you find a gap in the market?
4 P's of marketing, as the legend Philip Kotler says, is product, price, place and promotion.
Did D2C get costly or was it always costly?
It has gotten costly in the last decade or so.
Okay.
And
Is it because Facebook and Instagram started to charge you more? Why do all brands start with China?
India does not have the capability or rather the raw material to produce semiconductors, and thereby all of that comes from China.
How do you compete in this space with no funding?
We did not change a product every 3 months. We are building slower products, but they were built for scale, they were built for a longer time.
So are you telling me that most of this is just fluff and no stuff? Hi everybody, this episode has required an extensive production setup and we are able to bring this episode to you only because of the generous support of Odoo. Odoo is one of the best all-in-one business management applications. People, we understand that sales is a crucial aspect of any business, but managing and tracking leads can be tough. Without a solid sales tool, you might miss opportunities and lose revenue. But here's where Odoo can help you out. Odoo Sales app streamlines every aspect of your sales process with powerful features designed to boost efficiency. With Odoo Sales, you can easily create and send customized quotations, choose your invoicing methods, and manage down payments with ease. It also offers customizable templates to automate recurring orders and helps you close deals faster through its customer portal. Odoo helps you manage your products effortlessly, adjust pricing strategies, and it also helps you sync orders from Amazon and eBay effortlessly. And you can manage promotional activities such as loyalty programs, discounts, and even coupons from the app and send it to everyone or selected customers. So all in all, Odoo streamlines your processes, enhances customer interactions, and boosts your sales performance effortlessly. So experience smarter sales management with Odoo Sales. And if you download the app from the link below, Odoo will provide you with lifetime free access for your first Odoo application with unlimited hosting and support. So if you find this useful, check out the link in the description. Hi Varun, good afternoon. Welcome to the Indian Business Podcast.
Hi Ganesh, thank you so much for having me here.
Varun, I'm really excited to have you here because I was going through your journey and I found something very, very fascinating. And this is something that I intend to uncover through this podcast. You are a bootstrapped company, and while your competitors had hundreds of crores in capital, you chose not to raise capital. And today, you are generating a revenue of 700 crore rupees. And that is crazy. In fact, you entered the space in 2017 when, if I'm not wrong, Boult was already doing 27-30 crores odd. And Noise was also a significant player in the market. So my question is, and this is what I'm intending to decode throughout this episode, what exactly is the philosophy of a bootstrap company? How is it different from a company that is well funded? How does it change your approach towards building products, toward going to the market? And more importantly, what are the strengths and weaknesses of building a bootstrap company? Because today, because of Shark Tank and because of all this funding buzz, a lot of these 21, 22-year-old kids often tend to see funding as a great instrument to grow. But they also don't realize that if not done right, funding could become a virus that could just bring you down. So if you can enlighten me on all these aspects throughout the episode, that'll be great. So if that's clear, shall we get started?
Yes, lovely. Excited to traverse this journey with you. So shoot.
Perfect. So, Varun, the first thing that I want to understand is the TWS space. So let's start with the full form of TWS and then let's break down the TWS space in such a way that we establish context towards where does Boult stand, where does Noise stand, and where does Boult stand.
So, before we dive deep into Ganesh, into true wireless stereo, so the full form is true wireless stereo. So these are two truly wireless earbuds, and the name of the jargon comes from the idea that basically the earphones started from being wired, started moving to a category called wireless neckbands, where there was a neckband which was wirelessly connected to your device, but the two buds of the neckbands were connected with a cable. The third category that eventually emerged around to year 2017 was true wireless earbuds, where there were two independent buds which were completely connected wirelessly to each other, and thereby they were connected wirelessly to the device that you're streaming data with. So before we dive deep into true wireless, the parent category is called audio. Under that, we have personal audio and home audio and car audio and institutional audio for solutions and so on. So within personal audio, you have true wireless earphones, you have wireless neckbands, you have wired earphones, you have over-ear headphones, you have portable speakers, and then you have home audio, which has sound bars and speakers and so on. So true wireless earphones in the last 7 odd years since that it has emerged has started becoming, or is now the biggest category in the audio domain because of its mobility, of its acceptability, because it's fast, portable, light, comfortable. So this has become the biggest category. So when we launched our first product in 2017, we launched with the idea and philosophy that we caught on to the pulse of the wireless earphones coming into the market, because that was the time where Apple had started plugging its headphone jacks from its earphones and started making wireless headphones. And that's when a lot of other Chinese mobility players started following the suit. And thereby, where the consumer was used to getting a wired headphone in the box, and overall, thereby, a lot of consumers who bought a smartphone did not have to buy an earphone. Finally, they started buying earphones, and they started switching to wireless earphones. And which is when there were a lot of international brands that were priced at over 5,000 to 10,000 rupees.
Okay.
Which is when Indian brands like us started stepping into that space between, let's say, 1,000 to 5,000 rupees, starting to offer products that were more accessible, good quality, have a good brand recall, and thereby it makes a good value proposition for consumers to buy these products. Because also these products being wireless, consumers tend to lose them as well, or they tend to go bad. So that is where consumers are willing to buy lesser price point earphones. And today we have about a 12% market share in the true wireless category.
Okay.
And true wireless category in itself is about 4,000 crores in India. And about 70%, 75% of this revenue comes from e-commerce marketplaces like of Amazon, Flipkart, and other platforms. And they together constitute about 85 to 90% of the e-commerce sales. But now a heavy portion of this demand is also being taken by the quick commerce platforms like Swiggy, Instamart, Big Basket, and of course Blinkit as well. But up till, let's say, year 23 end, the majority, 90% of the sales was taken by Amazon and Flipkart itself. So now coming back to true wireless is about 55% of the audio market. The neckbands as a category is about 20-25%. Speakers are about 10%. Over-ear headphones are about another 7-8%, and the rest is any other subcategory. So now personal audio is huge, and it's because of the dripping price points, it is getting more access, more reach, and thereby it's become a huge category. So now personal audio is roughly about $1.5 billion market in the country, and about 6,000 odd crores out of that is 6,500 crores done by e-commerce marketplaces. And lastly, there is also D2C platforms of brands where they also are able to sell this. But again, D2C constitutes to only about 10% of the entire market. So that's how the market is poised.
Okay, tell me something. Let's say you're selling offline versus you selling online through e-commerce and you selling D2C. Is there a difference in the margins?
Yes, the margins would vary, but it's primarily because of the maturity in that channel. There's a price journey for each of the platforms. There's no thumb rule that which of the platforms would be more profitable or less. But having said that, D2C is the least margin offering platform for each, which is very surprising.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Now, it's very counterintuitive, because somebody would assume that because on D2C you're not giving out margins, and typically e-commerce marketplaces would charge anywhere between 25 to 35% margins, and you would assume in D2C you will not offer any margins to anybody. So which is where you should be losing out or gaining maximum net EBITDA. But having said that, the CAC, which is the customer acquisition cost, is extremely huge. And typically on e-commerce marketplaces or in offline, the CACs are initially higher when you launch a product or a brand, but thereby the marketing cost as a percentage of sales starts reducing, which in e-commerce terms we call it ROAS, or ACOS, advertising cost as a percentage of sales. Okay. But in D2C, for every customer or every order you acquire, you need to advertise. In marketplaces or offline, you need to have an initial spike, which is where you need to invest money to get initial traction, initial revenue, initial rate of sales for a certain product or a brand, and thereby there's a lot of organic sale that starts coming in. So initially, as I said, it is also a function of the journey and what part of the timeline are you in. Marketplaces typically will be very deeply negative when you launch a certain brand.
Negative?
Because, yes, because there's a lot of competition. The cost per clicks are very high, which makes the customer acquisition cost very high, thereby increasing your advertising cost as a percentage of sales, and thereby your net margin is very low. But once your revenue, which is coming from advertising, starts dipping and there is a lot of organic revenue that starts coming in e-commerce marketplaces, that's when you start becoming profitable. Now, in offline, it is very similar, but this process in this journey is relatively longer. Because in offline, to establish your presence, it takes years in comparison to days or weeks in marketplaces for setting up an SKU. Of course, building a brand in marketplaces would take maybe months or years, but building up an SKU or a certain product would take about few weeks to few months. However, if you want to do that in offline, it will take few months to a few years because you have to be established in thousands of zip codes in the country, be available at thousands of point of sales in the country, be known by a lot of distributors, retailers. So there's a lot of human touch and feel and emotion. So you have to mobilize a lot of humans as a part of your channel and network. So it takes a lot of time. And thereby to channelize such a huge amount of people as a part of your ambassadors and people who really vouch for you as a brand, you need to pump in a lot of advertising money and funds, and you need to build a large team. And that is why offline, the barrier to entry is very high for a lot of new brands. So if we have young watchers and viewers and entrepreneurs, I'll still advise them to not ignore marketplaces, because if any new founder, and I've come across thousands of founders who build a great product, but they only want to sell it by their website because they think either they'll sell directly on Instagram or on their website.
Correct.
And they think here is where I'm not leaking any money or margins or any intermediaries that I'm paying through. So I would still recommend them to go through e-commerce marketplaces, run D2C and run their own store as well. But it is also a function of the price points as well. So D2C is the least profitable, but a lot of brands run their D2C platforms for advertising. So even if brands are not profitable on D2C, they think this is their advertising cost in the business, even if they're not profitable and they're not losing any money. So they're able to run branding out of their brand, able to get more recall, more awareness, more access, more reach to customers, and thereby they're able to build a larger brand so that when they're running their sales on a profitable platform, they're able to make more money out of that.
So Varun, you're telling me this is the complete opposite of what I thought and what most people thought. We always thought that D2C is the most profitable channel of all. Then comes marketplace and then comes offline. Because you also mentioned that you need to have a very large workforce working for you on ground and spread across hundreds of pin codes. So then how is offline more profitable as compared to D2C? I mean, I'm not able to understand the logic behind this. So can you please give me like an example? Let's say you are Boult, you are a brand who has just entered the market and now you want to sell. With D2C, how is it that you will incur very less profit? With e-commerce, how is it that you will incur significant profit? And how is it possible that through offline, you will be able to incur maximum profit? Like, what's the logic behind that?
So this profitability is a function of a lot of factors. One is time, that how much time do you need to invest into building that channel. Second is the amount of workforce, and thereby let's break down the cost. Okay, so there is a certain selling price and there is a certain manufacturing price, which is called COGS, cost of goods sold. And let's figure out what goes in between. So the number one is, let's say, the channel margin cost. So in D2C, the channel margin cost would be nearly zero because you're running your platform on a Shopify or your own built website. In e-commerce marketplaces, the channel margin would be anywhere between 15 to 25%. And in offline, this channel margin would be the highest, which will be between 20 to 30%. Or in some cases, in low ASP products, it could also go up to 30-35%. Now, next factor is marketing cost. Now, marketing cost as a percentage of sales is the highest in D2C, which can go anywhere between 15% to 50 or 60%.
50 or 60?
Yes.
So this marketing cost, are you talking about Instagram ads, Facebook ads, and Google ads?
Which is also called performance marketing, which is when you run an ad and you get revenue against it. And if you get $100 of revenue and how much of money is that you invest into it, or it's also measured in a different metric called ROI, return on investment, or ROAS, return on ad spends. So if your ROAS is 2, which means you spend 1 rupee and you get 2 rupees worth of revenue, and an inverse of that is advertising cost of sales, which means if you get 1 rupee of revenue, how much rupees that you have to invest? If let's say that is 0.5, that which means your 50% of the revenue is advertising cost of sales.
So you're saying that for D2C, the cost may range anywhere between 15% to 50%.
Yes, or even 60% for that matter.
Okay.
Now let's come down to team cost. Now D2C will require relatively will be somewhere in the middle in terms of the team, because you will require about a team of 5 to 10 people on an average, depending on the company size, the number of products, number of products that you're shipping in a day, and so on. Then we move to e-commerce marketplaces, which is very minimal in terms of the number of team, because you count out the logistics, you count out the listing, cataloging, running the tech of the platform, because all of that is taken care of by the third-party marketplace. So the team cost is the minimal in terms of e-commerce marketplaces. Now, in the offline channel, this cost is obnoxiously big, because you need to have tons of people across the country. By tons, I mean you need a national sales head, you need zonal sales managers, you need state heads, you need feet on street. There are called territory sales managers, area managers, and so on, and zonal managers, and so on. And typically, brands would have, any large brand doing more than 100 crores plus worth of revenue in the offline channel would have easily over 100 people in their offline team.
Wow.
And it is a chicken and egg problem, because until you build such a large workforce, you cannot build a large distribution channel. You cannot build something called a width of sale, which is the number of stores that you present at. For you as a brand to be present across thousands of stores in the country, you need a lot of feet on street who will go to a lot of retailers along with distributors and make sure that your products are listed, and thereby they're seen by the customers, they're marketed well, and so on. So thus, as a percentage, employee cost as a percentage of sales is the highest in the offline channel. Now, the last part is, how do we see marketing as a percentage in terms of the timeline? So one is the marketing cost as a percentage of acquiring one order. So in D2C, the marketing as a percentage of acquiring one order, that is, let's say 25%, that will stay constant throughout the journey of the brand. Whenever you're selling, it might hover by a few percentage points above or below that, but it will not drastically change. In e-commerce marketplaces, that graph marketing percentage starts going down as you start becoming more mature in that industry. So initially, marketing as a percentage of sales for a new brand might go up to 75%, 100%, or 150%. 150 means for getting 1 rupee of revenue, you might have to invest 1.5 rupees of advertising sales. But that 150% can even come down to 10% or even a single digit percentage. That is when you start becoming profitable, when your marketing percentage starts going down in the long run on e-commerce marketplaces. Similarly, in the offline channel, it starts going down when you start running advertising, and there its performance in terms of getting danglers, more visibility in stores, paying store boy incentives, getting the right feet on street, etc. All of that, if you start investing rightly, it will start giving you revenues, and thereby you can start cutting down on those costs, because your products will start becoming more visible. And once your products start selling well in these stores, there will be an organic demand for these products, just like an e-commerce platform. There will be organic searches, exactly. However, on D2C, there is very little organic demand apart from repeat purchases. Nobody really goes to Google, and there are very little percentage of people going to Google and searching for a brand. They typically search for a category on Google or an e-commerce marketplace, which is where there is an organic demand for the category, and products which are selling well will start doing well. Similarly, in offline, there will be demand of a category, which means a customer might walk into a store asking for a true wireless earphone, and he will see some products and thereby make a choice on price, quality, the negotiation skills of the retailer, and so on. However, in D2C, customers not going out to look for a product. He always has to be pushed by an ad, and thereby the advertising cost is very, very high. So net D2C, which is unintuitively is not such a great profitable platform. But last comes the fourth vector, which is the function of COGS. Now, there are categories which have the COGS as a percentage of the retail value.
Okay, just give me a second. Can you please elaborate on COGS with an example?
Okay. So by COGS, I mean, by the way, cost of goods sold. So there are categories like electronics where the cost of goods sold as a percentage of the total revenue
or the selling price is very high. In other words, the gross margin is very little. And I elaborate that. Let's say if you're buying a smartphone worth 10,000 rupees, the manufacturing cost might range between 4,000 to 6,500 rupees. Similarly, if you buy any product for a fashion category for that matter, if you buy a 2,000 rupee or a 1,500 rupee shirt, the manufacturing cost might be anywhere between 150 rupees to 350 rupees. So thereby in fashion, cosmetics and FMCG as a category, the COGS is very little, which means the gross margins are very high, which allows players to utilize a very large portion of their P&L into advertising. So thus, if you see a fashion brand doing and selling a 1,500 rupee shirt on D2C on an Instagram ad, the manufacturing cost for a 1,500 rupee product cannot be over 500 rupees. So that is why it allows them a 1,000 rupee cover to start investing into advertising. However, for an electronic product, a 1,500 rupee product might be manufactured at anywhere between 800 rupees to 1,000 rupees, which gives a very little cover for brands to start advertising, which means their net marketing cost has to be under 33% for that transaction.
Got it. So if I were to put it in small, medium, large, your e-commerce has the smallest of the teams. Then you have D2C, which stands at medium, and then you have offline space, which is large team. Then when it comes to marketing cost, D2C has the maximum marketing cost and it doesn't go down with time.
Yes.
When it comes to e-commerce, it is extraordinarily high
Initially.
It might range anywhere between 80% to 150% also. But then it eventually comes down if you do a good job in that particular space. And when it comes to offline, it stays consistent for a very long time and eventually drops once the customer starts demanding for your product.
Makes sense.
Then when it comes to margin, when it comes to D2C, as in platform margin, when it comes to D2C, it's quite negligible. When it comes to e-commerce, it's quite significant. Could be anywhere between 15 to 20%, you said. And when it comes to offline space, it might go up 20% to 30%, sometimes even 35%. But if you were to be a brand, if you want to be a...
And let's add one vector. Is there a organic demand or not? Which is it a push category or a pull category?
Okay,
so
can you give me one example quickly for push and pull both? For push, as you mentioned, if it is a new product or a new category of products, then you'll have to push it. When it comes to pull, what would that be?
So pull category would be any standard product which is selling in the market. Let's say sneakers are doing really well in fashion, or t-shirts or streetwear is doing really well, or simple polos are doing well. So there'll be an organic demand. Similarly, in my category, consumers will come and search for headphones, wireless headphones, true wireless headphones, and that will have an organic demand. And pull categories would be something new that you're doing. And as I gave an example, if you're running a new educational course for your viewers on how to have a B school beyond a B school. So then you have to run a separate course where there's no demand for it. And then you have to run.
Interesting. So now that you've laid down the premise of the entire market, I want to now start with the journey of Boult.
Yes.
You started in 2017. And like I said, back then, Boult and Noise, they were significant brands. So my first question is, Varun, how did you find a gap in the market? Or did you even know that there was a gap in the market?
Yes. So once I started, I was very clear about the gap in the market. I used to do a lot of consulting for e-commerce brands, and in that process, I also happened to work with a lot of audio brands, both national and international. So when I started, I came from a company called Snapdeal. In 2014-15, I'd worked with them for some time, and back then it used to be the second biggest e-commerce marketplace in the country. So I started understanding how the e-commerce landscape works. So when I moved out of that company, I started consulting a lot of smaller e-commerce brands or larger offline heavy brands and started taking them online, saying that, hey, we understand how e-commerce functions and we can build your e-commerce platforms. Back then, brands had digital teams, but they did not have e-commerce teams. That's where we took that leverage and started building that.
So this was your own company?
Yes, this was my third startup. So Boult happens to be my fourth startup. So when I started doing this, we started understanding what is the product, price, place, promotion mix and the 4P mix and where are...
Hold on. What was those 4 Ps?
4 Ps of marketing, as the legend Philip Kotler says, is product, price, place and promotion. Product and price are very simple to understand. Place is the channel that you're selling in. Promotion is a simpler word for marketing, right? So what is the combination of 4 Ps to build any business, be it a product or a service on any platform? If you get these 4 Ps right, you've gotten the 80% of the basics of your business right. So that's how it typically functions. So we started figuring out what product to sell at what price, what channel, or how to use that channel, and thereby how to market your product on that channel. We started figuring that formula out. And in that process, we used to go to a lot of our clients and say, hey, this is working and this is how it can work. We have data from marketplaces about what product, what color, what SKU, what variant, what size, etc., can work. But thereby, brands were not really willing to make that change
But
because
how did you get that data?
because if you work very closely with the marketplaces, you will get that data. There are a lot of tools by which you can organically get that data. Like Amazon has a tool called Pi, Flipkart has backend analytics. As a seller, you can see what are your click-through ratios, which is percentage of people who click on your product or ad. What are your conversion rates? What are your top selling products? What are the top selling products by the competition? How many products are being sold by the competition? What are the top most rated products? Top most searched keywords? Top most clicked keywords on the ads, top most clicked ads, and so on. There's so much of data that you get
And you can use all the data to help a particular client.
to help your client, or to more importantly help yourself with developing the right product at the right price point, and thereby, and most importantly, also get a lot of consumer feedback in terms of ratings and reviews. And it's not just a number that you get on an Excel, but you get qualitative understanding of what customers are saying, why or why not do they like or not like your product. So which gives you a lot of information to go back and change. So one thing that also read on this wall, that you need not be a perfectionist. You need to have an iterative process of building your products. So there's a young listener who's watching us today, he or she need not build the perfect or the best ever product. They need to build a product which is an MVP, and which they can start selling to a customer, testing it out on a D2C platform or a marketplace. Maybe run an ad for 5,000-10,000 rupees, get your first few hundred customers, get a feeler of how they're behaving, launch a few variants, launch a few sizes, colors, flavors, etc., and see what is that gets you more demand. So when we launched our products, we thought all the blacks and whites in our products will do well. But I, as an artist, I'm a musician by choice, by hobby. So I was very fascinated by making great designs for my products. I started making products with wood, with leather, with aluminum, with copper, very varied kinds of colors, fabrics and braided cables and so on. So
You did this for earphones.
Yes, I did
Do you
that for my
remember
earphones.
House of Marley?
Yes, exactly. I know them as well. So we started making our headphones with wood, with leather and all of that. So we initially thought that will not get acceptability because nobody makes that. However, we also got a reality check that there were a small percentage of customers who absolutely loved that product, but the masses did not want all of that. So thereby we had to tone down our aspiration, our creative designer instincts, to bring it to more massy, but to also add a flavor of design, which is our DNA, which is our moat as a brand, that we make products which are never seen before. So we design all our products by ourselves. So that's where we saw a gap that we could build. This was a commoditized market that was becoming, where consumers were spoiled for choices and they were just buying products and features versus a certain price. And there was not so much of consideration for a brand, not so much consideration for art or for design or for an experience. It was all about a rational choice between features and price, which also happened to smartphones as an industry about 5 years back. So when we entered that market, we were very clear that we wanted to do something very new, especially when it's digital as a platform. A lot of purchase a decision is based on emotion, is based on visuals. So thus your product has to stand out in terms of its aesthetics, its appeal, its design, its shape, its form factor, and its colors. So that's where we focus and we built our moat around it. So that's where we had to start understanding what materials to use. So thereby we had to cut down on some kind of materials that were not really appreciated, where the consumers were not willing to pay a premium for that materials. However, there was a lot of work on design, on colors, on form factors, on finishes, which consumers were willing to pay a premium for, and where they made their decision more from a rational decision to a more emotional decision.
For example?
So having, for example, something as simple as having different colors. So when we launched our category and we got into our category, about 80% of the sales came from a black color. About 15% came from white, because of course that was a color introduced by the world's largest brand. And 5% of sales came from all other colors like red, blue, green,
Just
and so on.
5%?
Yes, exactly. Because
When you launched first?
Yes, because it was electronics as a category, and typically people are buying a functional product and they typically buy black and whites, right? And maybe for smartphones back then it was very evolved, so people have started experimenting into more colors, into purples and reds and so on. But whenever there's a new category and people are buying a functional product, they're making a very rational choice. So that's when we introduced, let's say, a blue, a cyan, a feminine colors, light pinks, lilacs, olive greens and so on. And our color palette was in the shades of blue, so we started launching different products in shade blue, anywhere between light blue to a dark blue to a navy. We started adding accent colors, complementary colors, contrasting colors. So there's a black product or navy product, adding a touch of uh, fluorescent green to this in the product, and thereby making it interesting for a customer.
But didn't this affect your production? Because if you're making product with so many variants, so many colors, that would affect your production, right?
It does. Of course, it comes at a cost. If you just make two colors which are black and white, it's easier to source, it's easier to manufacture, the rejection rates are much lower. But of course, if you innovate, it will be a difficult journey. But of course, there's more acceptability from a customer.
Makes sense. So tell me something. So this is from the standpoint of a product. Now let's come to the business in general. So when you started, how much capital did you start with?
Our first purchase order was for a product. For one single product, the purchase order was what 15 lakh rupees, was 1,000
15 lakh
units.
rupees. So how did you place
It was
this
about
order?
1,500 units at a
1,500
cost
units.
price of about 1,000, 1,200, was about 15 lakh rupees.
1,000, 1,200. So did you manufacture this in-house or did you outsource it?
So initially, our manufacturing was outsourced.
Okay.
But thereby, we started bringing a lot of manufacturing, research, design capability in-house.
Okay. So this thing was outsourced to China, right?
Yes, initially.
Bro, tell me something. Why do all brands start with China? Because when it comes to a limited production of 1,000 units, 2,000 units, I think up to 20, 30,000 units, everybody prefers China. And once we scale it up, we then try to bring it to India because of the Make in India initiative and stuff like that. But why is it that we always have to go to China for producing 1,000, 2,000 units? Is it because they have a much better setup, a much economical setup? What is it?
I think it was a connotation about 5 to 10 years back, but today the narrative has changed. There is a lot of abundance of supply in Make in India. In most of the categories that we know, there is huge amount of suppliers in India. There are enough platforms for people to go and search for suppliers. There's a lot of initiative from the government under the Make in India, be it special economic zones, be it incentivization on something called PLI schemes, product linked incentives, and so on. There's a huge amount of supply coming to India. Now, the major reason for any new brand or new manufacturer to go international is dependent on availability. It's not about cost.
Okay.
So if somebody is willing to set up a new brand, and if we have a new customer who's willing to make a new bag, new footwear, new electronic, if there's availability for them in India, they either do not feel the need to go to China, they need not fly to a different country, speak a different language, work with strangers, have no regulation. It is very difficult to work with international suppliers. And people are getting it at a lower cost in India because it's produced locally. Also, the labor cost in India is about 1/3 times than it is in China. So an average laborer in India in a state where it is not extremely regulated would be about 10 to 15,000 rupees. However, in China, the same laborer would be paid anywhere between 3 to 3,500 RMB, which is equivalent to about 35 to 40,000 rupees. So we're getting extremely cheaper labor. We're getting access to machinery. We're getting access to everything. Availability, the shipping costs are lower. The production cycles are lower. The MOQs thereby, or MOQ is minimum order quantities, become lesser. So it makes a lot of sense for Indian players to start newer startups. So start sourcing in India.
Today.
Yes.
But back in 2017, what was the scenario?
The biggest problem back then was lack of supply. And it was also bigger function is rather before the supply, I'd say the category itself. Now, if you're working in fashion, footwear, in let's say bags as a category, furniture for that matter, in a lot of categories, there is a lot of supply in India. Food, FMCG, paper, you take a lot of categories, plastics even for that matter. But the moment you move to electronics, it requires a very large capital infrastructure, a lot of R&D capability, and a lot of dependency on semiconductors, so which India did not have a lot of capability of. We did
By
not
supply, you mean manufacturers?
supply of manufacturers, raw material suppliers. So now batteries and CV has come into the picture in the last decade. A lot of battery manufacturers have come up, but up till 2018-19, there was no supply of batteries. India still is not producing a huge amount of silicon, or in simple words, semiconductors, or thereby making PCBs or chipsets. A lot of these chipsets are still manufactured by Korean, Japanese, Taiwanese, and Chinese companies, and thereby is imported to India. A lot of India does not
have the capability to, or rather the raw material to produce semiconductors, and thereby all of that comes from China. So a lot of companies which are making in India, including automobiles, including smartphones, laptops, and our mobile accessories as a category, are importing some technical raw materials from China or Taiwan or Korea and Japan, and thereby putting all of that together and sourcing, like companies like us source a lot of plastics in India, metals, rubbers, silicons, silicon at the rubber silicon, the cables, packaging, paper, plastics are sourced in India. Some technical components that we are not able to source in India, we have to source it from different countries. We bring that to India, put them onto a production cycle, a manufacturing assembly cycle, and thereby we've produced a finally finished good, which has gone through multiple tests, has gone through a packaging cycle, and finally it comes to a customer in form of finished packaged good.
Perfect.
So for a new customer, it is the category. If that category has availability in India, and I gave examples of a lot of categories, I don't think they need to go to any other country. Possibly it is also the last factor, the mindset. People feel that if you're sourcing in India, that it will be an inferior product. It will be a seen before product. And if it is coming from another country, it is feeling different. It has a different mindset. It has an international tag attached to it. And that's why it will be superior. There was a case study where there was this silica-based product called Fit Curry, which was in India, and how international brands have rebranded it to call it some wonderful magic stone, and they're selling a 100 rupee Fit Curry at 2,500 rupees, right?
Alum, no? If I'm not wrong.
Alum stone, yes.
Sarthak just spoke about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are multiple case studies like that, but we need to believe that there are good products if they are researched upon rightly, if they are packaged rightly, if they're communicated rightly and branded rightly. There will be a demand for these products.
Got it.
You
You
need
again-
not go to a different country and produce a transformationally different product. You need to just have small incremental innovation in your packaging, in your communication. And of course, the product needs to be solid in terms of its quality in testing standards. And there needs to be a small market that the customer, that the entrepreneur can focus on, and thereby start building a small market for it.
Now tell me, Varun, during this time, your competition had already raised money, right? And within some time, they got Bollywood stars to endorse them, because of which the recall value increased, the aspiration value increased, and eventually they started to pick up. And they started to hit more and more revenues. Eventually, they started to grow multiple manifolds. During that time, did it not strike you to raise money? If yes, then how did you counter it?
It did strike us to raise money. But one thing we need to understand, whenever there is competition raising money and any market is growing, it's not a bad thing for you as a competition. Sometimes people have a sense of or a fear of missing out, or get that feeling that we will be wiped out or we will be completely evaded and removed from the market, but that is not true. If there is competition raising money in any category, it is a huge validation to the category, to the business model, and it increases the entire market. When a competitor raises $10 to $100 million, they will invest a lot of media, a lot of energy, a lot of funds into building awareness for that category, building that category. Thereby, it increases the entire market size. It is not a zero-sum game. In simpler words, it is not a limited sized market that only 100 products have to be sold, and if a competition raises money, they will start acquiring a larger market share within that 100%. If multiple players in the competition are raising money, that 100 ka market will grow to 200, 300 and 500. So even if you take a relatively lower market share, so let's say your market share reduces from 10 to 8%, but the market grows to 2x. So you're now getting 8% of 2x, which is 1.6, instead of 10% of 1, which is 10%. So the market increases. Now, while my competition was raising money, we were very clear in our mind about few metrics. A, what is the DNA of the company? We were a bootstrapped company from two siblings, two founders who were really passionate about what they were building. We knew from the beginning that we were designed for scale, that we have to build an international brand. We have to build something which is of great quality and which can get access and reach to millions of Indians and thereby people across the world. But we knew from the beginning that we have to be patient about it. Secondly, we knew that we were to operate in limited categories and limited products. Now, while my competition, which was raising money, and there were traditional Indian brands which were legacy players in our category, they were selling more than 8 to 10 categories and 100 plus SKUs.
And they were trying to do anything and everything. They were just sourcing products from China, labeling it, stamping it, selling it. While we knew our production cycles were slower, our research, our design cycles, we invested into molds for making products. We took more time to build products, but we knew that we will be investing into limited categories, but really going deep in that category. And that's why we mastered audio as a category today. That's why, in spite of having the second biggest market share in our audio category, we're the number one rated brand in the country. That is because of huge focus. And as Rajiv Badad said, that you are going to be spreading, if you spread yourselves too thin, and if he were to move from the scooters to bikes to cars to everywhere, they would not be making everything else, and they would be having fragmentation of resources. So it is important to focus on what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and thereby build a business. Which brought us to the third vector, which is about understanding efficiencies and understanding bootstrapped businesses. Now, bootstrapped businesses have to be built on two vectors. A is patience, and second is profitability. Now, we need to have patience for scale. If there are companies or young founders who want overnight success, and if they see a success of a Blinkit or a Zepto from 21 to 24 and you want to be a unicorn in a year or 2 years or 3 years, yes, there will be 1 in a million companies which will become a unicorn in a short span of time, but people possibly don't or miss out on millions of failures in that process. Yet, there are thousands and millions of companies in this country which are run from home, which are run from small apartments or houses or factories, which are sustainable, which are profitable, and thereby creating larger value, but they're not celebrated enough. So, but the main media limelight is taken by funding businesses or funded businesses, and that's where we, the media, founders, and young entrepreneurs tend to celebrate or look up to more established or more funded businesses as a sense of aspiration. So thereby we chose that we have to be patient, we will be patient, and we will have the resilience and patience to go through the difficult parts, but yet we will know that we'll be profitable.
Bro, when you were talking about bootstrap businesses versus funded businesses, if I were to just draw conclusions from what we had the conversation about, number one, funded businesses are seen as aspiration merely because of PR. But what we often forget is that for centuries, in fact, in India after independence also, for decades, multi-billion-dollar businesses have been built bootstrapped. And that is not because they did something extraordinary, but because they did their basics right. They got their foundations right. And in foundations, you have multiple things, one of which is culture. Number two is the DNA based on which you have your culture. Then you have the right team. And more importantly, you have your products. If they're high quality, if they do insanely well, eventually the amount of money that you would spend on marketing will decrease. And that delta that a funded company has over a bootstrap company will eventually decrease. Because if you build great products, retention rates will be high, eventually generating more revenue and giving you better profit margins in the long run. Varun, tell me something. When it comes to talent, R&D, scale and price, all of these things are dependent on how much money you make. Okay, and specifically when it comes to your category, tell me something. Your funded competition has better access to talent because they'll be able to pay them more obviously and give them better ESOPs or stuff like that, which eventually will lure better talent towards your competition. Number two, when it comes to R&D is all about putting in millions of dollars, hoping that you would succeed once. And for that, the opportunity cost is very high. Similarly, when it comes to scale is primarily built on the foundation of great marketing, especially in your category, where if you have a Bollywood celebrity, if you have sports stars as your celebrity, the adoption of the brand becomes much easier. It accelerates to such an extent that you're able to place much bigger orders with your suppliers, eventually giving you the benefit of economies of scale. And this economies of scale gets you two more benefits. A, it gives you the power to decrease your price because it gives you another power, which is increased gross margins. So my question is, when it comes to specifically the wearable segment, there isn't is my assumption right that there is very less scope for bringing in something absolutely revolutionary? Is that correct?
To some extent,
Okay.
but I'll define the word revolutionary for you.
So
later.
from the outside, this is my perspective as an outsider, that there is very less scope to bring in something absolutely revolutionary, which will become the defining factor for the sales of your company. And during such times, what is important that you have better talent, you have better R&D, eventually giving you better scale, eventually helping you with price. Because India is a value sensitive market, if not a price sensitive market. So if you're able to provide better features at less price, like you mentioned in the beginning, the consideration of the customer even today is largely based on just functionality and the price. If they get more functions in less price, they will opt in for it, even though those functions may be less accurate as compared to competition, which are charging a 10x premium and are giving you results with much better accuracy. Because A, the customer is not aware of the magnitude of the errors that go within the technology. B, they don't understand the repercussion of that error. And C, they just think it's a feature and they don't see it as a fault if that feature goes wrong. A simple example of the same could be your watches. In a smartwatch, if I am told that I am burning 2000 calories, I will eat differently as compared to when I'm told that I am burning 1100 calories. So that 900 calories and the technology that goes behind it is not something that the customer cares about. And they also do not understand the repercussion of that inaccuracy of 900 calories, which will eventually get you to eat more. Eventually, you will put on more weight and it could further ruin your health to a large extent. So in such a market, which is so competitive, so value sensitive, where customers' awareness towards the most important features, which could cost you very heavily, but may not get you the eyeballs, when it is so prevalent, how do you compete in this space with no funding?
So I'll break down this answer and understanding. You spoke about 4 pillars. One was talent. Second was the R&D.
Correct.
Third was scale,
Price.
and marketing. And fourth was how the first 3 help you with the price and economies of scale and so on. So I'll speak about us and try to sort of simplify it for audiences for them to understand. When you're building a bootstrap business, we also spoke about the values of the business and the founder. And if the foundations of the company are the strong and the foundations have a clear DNA and a clear vision about what they're building, it starts reflecting onto your people, because the founders are very closely working with their people and they've not just hired anybody and everybody on their payrolls just for the payrolls, because you start building a very small core team of young, passionate professionals. Like you mentioned at thinkschool, you have people who've been around for years and now they're ambassadors of the brand, and they're now sort of in a working fashion sort of co-founders for you, right? So thereby you build a strong core team that is motivated and passionate and like hugely driven by the business and its values, and thereby you're able to build a core team. And a great way to do that is offering ESOPs to your employees. While you might not be able to offer huge amount of salaries, but you sort of put their skin in the game by offering ESOPs. So for example, if there's a young entrepreneur who has first 10 employees, I would recommend him to give them anywhere between a few 0.5% to a 5% equity across the first 10 employees. You could easily give out anywhere between 2 to 10, 15%, depending on the scale of the business and the age of the business, right? Or how old are you in this business? So that's how you build a core team of people who really believe in the values and principles of the organization. Second is R&D capability. Now, R&D sometimes is, in a traditional fashion, is R&D is proportional to the capital that you have access to.
Correct.
But in a non-traditional fashion, R&D is somehow inversely proportional to the overall capital and scale of the business. Why? Because when an organization is growing at supernormal numbers, the focus on R&D becomes minimal. They try to do everything. They try to launch multiple products, multiple categories, and there is more focus on revenue and thereby shorter lead times, shorter production times. And we've seen that with our competition as well, where they try to build a product and they have to touch a certain revenue. The focus on quality, focus on research, and the time allowed for that building that product or top quality product is much lesser, because you do not have the patience to build that product, because if you were to, it will reduce your supply. So you have to maintain a consistent supply of products, for which you will have to reduce your production times, research times to such a small number where R&D will become inefficient.
Boeing.
Exactly, as you rightly mentioned. And it is very clearly evident in the entire case study that you've spoken about on your channel. So thereby, if there is a smaller company and you see most innovative products coming from very small teams, very small organizations, where there'll be the FANGs of the world doing software research and so on, but you'll see a small 10-member team doing some AI innovation, some innovation that a larger company would not want to.
Correct.
Because they will have a really sharp, razor-focused on research and development for one product category or for one innovation. So in that case, companies like ours, we were really, really focused on building a great audio product and thereby great smartwatches. We did not have 100 products a year. We did not change a product every 3 months. We were building slower products, but they were built for scale. They were built for a longer time. And that's what gave us the moat to sort of build products for larger times. Third comes access to marketing. Now, when the first two are strong, it means you're building a great product. And now, if there is a company typically in any category, product or services, as we spoke about, if you have higher access to capital, you'll start buying media, and your CACs, which is customer acquisition cost or order acquisition cost, or in very simple terms, marketing cost will go very high. And it will be great to acquire first-time customers, but it will not necessarily give you repeat customers, loyal customers. It will build an aspiration by adding a celebrity, by adding great packaging, by adding a homepage newspaper ad or a YouTube masthead ad, etc. But it will not necessarily give you post-purchase satisfaction and thereby repeat purchase and loyalty. But if you're building a great product with a great team and great R&D, it will be slower. It will give you lesser access to scale initially, but it will definitely help you focus on a certain TG, which will resonate, as you mentioned, with your value systems, and which will help you get much larger loyalty, retention, and thereby much larger word of mouth, which means your marketing as a percentage of cost will be much lower, and you will be building your business on foundations of lesser CACs, more loyalty, more repeat purchase, and building a great product with a great team. So thus that helps you in getting the first three pillars right. And the last pillar is about economies of scale, where because you have larger volumes, you're able to focus on getting better cost, getting economies of scale. But that again is not necessarily true, because when there is a larger business or larger consumer brand, they grow their brand by or offering much larger product categories, because they figure that it is the brand name which is selling more than a product itself, which means they can invest into any category and start using that consumer trust or the marketing dollars that they spend into building that brand into selling any other product category, which means there are a lot more SKUs, lot more categories, which means there's lesser focus. In comparison to a smaller company like ours, where we built audio products, we built that with a lot of focus and precision, a lot of R&D, heart, blood and soul into it, and thereby you're able to bring down the product cost, because in comparison to a larger firm, they're building everything and anything under the sun, and the focus on cost and frugality is much lesser, because there are other people working on it, and the founders and the people who built the first few products are not there anymore, and they've hired other people to do the same job. And the transition was so fast that the transition or the transfer of that values or culture, philosophy and DNA was not possible, that somebody else took over and somebody else started. That knowledge transfer did not happen, and somebody else took over, and thereby their KRA, which means the key responsibility area, or their target was revenue, was growth rather than profitability. And thus you will often note that smaller companies have better R&D and better product manufacturing costs, because they have razor sharp focus on building a sustainable and profitable business, in comparison to a larger firm where their focus is to build for scale, to build for revenue, to build for growth and marketing, where sometimes and not always there is lesser focus on the foundations of the business, because the larger funded companies are driven by investors, where they have to chase a certain targets in terms of growth and building revenue and top line, rather than building for the right things that young bootstrap founders would do.
Bro, this is so interesting, because this is very similar to what the founder of Thyrocare mentioned. Did you know back then, this is when Thyrocare went IPO, okay? Back then they were doing 30 odd tests when their competition was doing more than 200 tests. And when I asked him, why were you doing like 30 odd tests and didn't you feel FOMO? You know what he told me? There are only two types of entrepreneurs. One who's successful, the other who got distracted. And that became like a viral reel on our channel. And that is so fascinating when you tell me that funding in a way could actually become a weakness if your funds are diverted towards doing the wrong things. And the lack of funding could actually become a strength in a bootstrap business, provided you have absolute focus on the things that are absolutely required. In this case, like you mentioned, that when a brand chases revenue over building a better product, then revenue will definitely come, but the product quality may not substantially improve. Whereas when it comes to a smaller company, because the company has no option but to focus on the product itself, they end up building much better products. So you see that as a strength, the constraint as a strength and not as a weakness. So okay. So tell me, Varun, when you first launched your product, now that I understand your entire value system, when you first launched your product with about 1500 quantities, my question is, what was so different about your product that other brands were not offering? Was it just the aesthetics, or was there more to it?
So it sort of initially, we did not have huge R&D capability. So we made sure that the product tech was at par or slightly better than competition. But the major USP of the product was our DNA of the brand, which is why we started the brand, is that we wanted to offer visually, aesthetically different products in terms of a design and form factor. That was the biggest differentiator when we launched. And thereby we started using different materials, as I said, different colors, form factors. And thereby we started building the next line of products on that DNA itself. And we started iterating in a much faster fashion to understand what is working, what is not. We started iterating with the materials, the colors, the price points even for that matter, and started understanding what features, what customer products, what subcategories are customers clicking on more. And because of digital businesses, you get huge amount of access to data about the CTRs, the conversions, the how the customer is behaving, what does he want, what price points the customers are buying at, and so on, which helps you in building and iterating much faster. And thereby, when we say building for perfection vis-a-vis building iteratively is not just a rhetoric, but it comes into meaningful context when you're actually selling products to a customer on a digital platform, because you get instant feedback and a lot of data points about whatever you're making and how consumers are reacting to it, which helps you in iterating and building a much faster product. That's how we built.
So from phase 1 to right now, how did you go about building that USP? Phase 1, it was design, I understood. Could you tell me, as you evolved, in phase 2, what was your USP?
In phase 2, we took that design, we started investing into R&D. Because as any young founder and any young startup, if you're not funded, you will not have huge amount of access to capital. But once we started getting the outer aesthetics, the outer shell and body of the product, that's relatively easier to fix rather than the internals of the product. That's when we started investing into R&D. I invested a lot of time into product. I'm an engineer and I'm a musician by hobby. So it helped me understand the nuances of the product, the electronic engineering, and as a consumer, because I was an audiophile and I'm an audiophile and a musician, I could understand the nuances of the product. That's where I started building custom sound, custom functionality. Custom sound in the sense, the custom sound curves, how a frequency response curve reacts, how this product builds a different frequency, how it produces different kind of frequencies for input frequencies from a song.
Not able to understand, bro.
Okay. So when a song has a certain frequency curve and there are different input frequencies, how it reacts with those frequencies and produces it in a better fashion to a consumer. In simpler terms, how do we deal with the bass, mids, and treble of the same sound curve?
Okay, and that is what defines the quality of the earphone.
Exactly. Not quality, but this is just how much bass, how much mids, and how much treble are you able to give. But quality is also a function of clarity, about loudness, about how much of what you hear, which is how much of bass, mids, and treble you hear. And thereby, how does software and hardware come together to build a product which is giving better experience to a customer. And it's not just that. Lastly, is about comfort, durability in the ear as well. How long can you wear it for? How much of comfort? How is the shape of the earphone? The weight of the earphone, as they call it in business terms, ergonomics, helping you get a better experience on the product. So thereby, we built the second phase of the company on the R&D, where it was slow. It was not backed by a huge amount of capital, but it required huge amount of in-depth understanding of building a product. And that was again an iterative cycle, because while we were constantly evolving the product, at that point in time, for the first 2 years, we did not go to Amazon or Flipkart, because we knew once we get there, we will taste bad blood of revenue. And once we start getting distracted, as you rightly mentioned about distracted entrepreneurs, once we start getting good taste of scale and revenue, we will be distracted from building a great product. For the first 1.5 to 2 years, we were on a limited platform, which was a fashion platform. We focused on the supply rather than on demand,
We were not working on revenue. We were not working on building a brand. We were not working on profitability, scale, and marketing. We were just building a great product. And once we knew that, yes, we had certain revenue on a certain platform, even though that's relatively smaller to a large market, but that allowed the engine to work for us to invest into R&D, our time, energies, and hire some people for the same. That's where we invested the next 1.5 years into building a really rock solid product. And once that we built a rock solid product, now we were ready to launch into the world, into all the major e-commerce platforms, and thereby build for scale.
Okay, by rock solid product, you mean great ergonomics, great sound, and great aesthetics, right?
Aesthetics was right there from the beginning in phase 1 itself. Great ergonomics, great sound, and great functionality in terms of having the right tech, which is noise cancellation, which is the right battery, which is having minimal error rates, and getting any new incremental features that a customer can.
Bro, now I understand the macro aspect of Boult, which is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And I want to delve deeper into the micro aspects, which are unit economics, barrier to entry, your minimum viable audience, and your fundamental marketing strategy. So you mentioned that you placed an order for 1,000 to 1,500 units. You got hold of those units, and then in phase 1, your major USP was aesthetics, and especially on Myntra. So my question is, back then, how did you understand your minimum viable audience? Firstly, for the audience, let's define what is minimum viable audience first, and then let's go to how did you define your minimum viable audience?
Sure. So by definition, minimum viable audience means a set of people, which is minimum in that sense, is in terms of restrictive, that it is a very well-defined audience, and it does not include anybody and everybody who will buy your product. But these are core set of people who resonate with your brand or the values or any of the functionality, which is in terms of design, offering, product, quality, pricing, etc. And thereby you start figuring out who are these people and you start designing a product for them. Or a
Can you give me an
service for them.
example which is not related to Boult?
So let's say if you talk about Nike sneakers and their limited edition collections. So they might know that we have a younger audience who might be in the age group of 15 to 25, who are more experimental, who are possibly students, who are coming from that affluent TG, possibly in India one, and who have the affluence and have willingness and awareness to buy, not just buy a regular Nike, but a limited series edition, and thereby pay a premium for it, which is a Jordan series or a special collaboration series and so on and so forth.
Also, Jack Daniels, along with the White Walkers, Johnny Walker.
Yep.
Johnny Walker introduced the White Walker collection when Game of Thrones last
collection.
season was airing.
Black Label. Johnny Walker's did it with Black Label.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So you have to understand who are these people, and it allows you to tap into a certain TG, right? So when you're launching a new product or a new category, you need not, as they say, if you're making something for everybody, you're not making it for anybody. So you have to figure out what is the core audiences that you're making for, what is their so-called demographic, which in simpler term means who are these people, what are their age group, what is their gender, what is their profession, what is their income group, what is their location, and thereby design a product and thereby the distribution and marketing strategy for a limited set of audiences.
Would taste, interest, and pain also come into this consideration of minimum viable audience?
Yes, but that's a layer 2. So initially it's about larger demographic pointers, about who they are, what do they do, income group, location, gender, age group, profession, etc. But then we get into their behavior, which is a deeper level. What are their needs and demands? What are their insecurities? What are their tastes and preferences and choices? But that's more at an emotional level than at a functional level. So if you want to really go deeper and emotional to understand what are the needs, insecurities, and thereby you have to understand that TG, their behavior, and have to have more focus group discussions to understand that consumer, and thereby build your marketing, not just the product, but the marketing communication around that emotion.
Before we go deeper into this, can you give me, because we've broken down minimum viable audience ka process also into two parts now. One is the standard process, and then there is a behavioral process, which is the layer 2. So if you were to look at 5 to 6 behavioral tags that you would tap into to understand your customer persona better, what would those behavioral tags be? Like you mentioned, insecurity, aspiration, needs. So if you were to look at the top 5 tags that you would tap into, what would they be?
So A very important technical construct comes from something that we read in our B school books called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it builds a pyramid of sorts of needs, what are basic need, essential needs, and then goes on to higher values in the pyramid, which is about self-esteem and emotional needs and so on. So we try to understand a consumer from their lifestyle, from a very emotional behavioral standpoint. Who are they? So these larger inputs, which is who are they, what do they do, where do they live, etc., gives us larger understanding of what is their behavior like. Now, thereby we take inputs from those vectors to understand if their income groups, what are they using, what car are they driving, are they using bikes. So, for example, we understood a very important metric about the behaviors of a consumer when we figured, we used to think that because our primary consumers in the first couple of years were India 2 and India 3, we thought they would not own a private vehicle because they cannot afford an automobile, a car, a four-wheeler, and they'd be primarily traveling through public transportation, which means...
Just a minute. Can you define India 1, India 2, India 3 and then go deeper?
Okay. So there are multiple definitions of India 1, 2, 3, but the definition that I'm referring to, India 1, is people who are taxpayers, who are less than 20 million people, 22 million people, and typically would have salaries over 7 lakh or 10 lakh rupees. And thereby, that's why they are taxpayers. India 2 is the second chunk of people, which is about 20 crore Indians, who are in the income group of 2 to 3 lakh rupees to about 7-8 lakh rupees. And then finally, you have 100 crore people, which is India 3, which are primarily from are sustaining on agricultural income, who are making under 3 lakh rupees a year, and thereby they're not even eligible to be taxpayers in the country in terms of primary taxation. So we assumed that a heavy portion of demand is coming from India 2 and India 3, and thereby they'd be using public transportation. But then once we started understanding their behavior, we started doing research, we figured that a heavy portion of these users are two-wheeler owners. So we figured that because in India 2 and 3, penetration of public transportation, unlike tier 1 cities like we have Mumbai Metro and Delhi Metro, Mumbai Locals and Delhi Metro, is not so prevalent, and the bus network is not so prevalent. People in India 2 and 3 use a lot more bikes than automobiles or even public transportation for that matter. And that brought us to an insight that there are bike users who use a lot of neckbands as a category, and their biggest need is wind reduction.
Reduction.
In terms of their noise microphone usage, because they're talking often like the Swiggy boys, people who are traveling on bikes to their work, to their college, or anywhere, or even just they're traveling for distribution of goods and the so-called feet on street by a lot of companies. These are people who are affected by the breeze and thereby need a microphone which is designed in a fashion such that it is able to cancel out the breeze when they're speaking to somebody. Because in a day there are multiple hours on the street, and that's when they use their earphones the most. So that's when, and they're primarily more using the earphones for talking more than entertainment consumption. And that's when we have to design a product for them and have to make sure that the needs are taken care of.
So the one takeaway that I'm getting from this story is that if you understand your minimum viable audience, you gain multiple insights which you may otherwise not get if you just try to sell to everyone. A, you understand what exactly is the pain and interest of the audience. B, you understand how to price your product, because now that you know that Swiggy boys and college boys are going to buy your product, you will know what is the appropriate pricing. And C, like you mentioned, if you understand their daily schedule at a microscopic level, you will be able to understand where exactly and for what purpose your product is being used, what is the hassle that the customer could face, and how do you fix that hassle and then market that in such a way that the customer resonates with the ad, understands that this is the offering of the company, and hence they will be able to buy a product. Versus if you operate without understanding, or if you make assumptions about your minimum viable audience, which may not be true, that will just topple everything from price to promotion to placement to everything, because you are technically firing a blind shot. Now, my question is, number one, how did you figure out that your assumption was wrong? And number two, do you do this for all of your products?
Oh, very interesting question. So I'll help you and walk you through this process. So just to top up your question and comment, it is not just about building a great product, but also to understand where your consumer is interacting and consuming content or spending his time, which allows us to figure where is that I invest into media, how is that I reach out to him. So is he a YouTube user or is he a TikTok user? Or is he a, now TikTok is not in India, is he a Moj or a Takatak user? Is he streaming on platforms? Is he on OTT or is he on a Geo? What smartphone is he using? And etc. so on and so forth, to figure the right platform for reaching out to him, and thereby knowing his behaviors, what is his income group, what kind of content he's consuming, what language he's speaking, what language do I speak with him in? Do I speak with him in only in English? Because we as brands and marketers are speaking in our boardrooms in English language. So we sometimes assume that my consumers not just understanding English, but also able to relate into in English. As they say, as Nelson Mandela once said, if you want to speak to a man's mind, you speak to him in English or a language that he's learnt in school. But if you want to speak to a man's heart, you speak to him in a language that he's learnt, which is his mother tongue. So, and that is where we understood that sometimes you have to unlearn, and we have to unlearn and not look at the market from our own perspective. Because if we start looking at the market, because as a product creator or designer, as an artist, we tend to be privileged with the level of education that we have, with access to information, capital, and knowledge that we have. Our world and our perspective is very different. And if you're designing a luxury product, a product with high SP, which is focusing on product people like you, then possibly you have an insight of a personal usage or a pain point that you're trying to solve for. But if we as a marketer, as a entrepreneur, founder are building a product for the mass audiences, our lifestyles, our needs, our location, geography, demographics are absolutely different to what a customer's lifestyle is. And thereby, it is a constant process of unlearning, removing that bias from your perception, from your judgments and calls, and everything that you do about marketing, communication, from the choice of words, the choice of problems that you're trying to solve for them, the choice of colors, to choice of product, to marketing, to the platform for that matter. Well, you might think Instagram might be a bigger platform for you, but for your consumer, a Facebook might be a bigger platform. And we've always seen that, because our consumers are still on Facebook, and Instagram might be as a platform bigger for people with higher affluence. But Facebook and streaming platforms or short form content platforms like Moj and Takatak might be bigger. So we need to understand where they're consuming and not look at the world from our lens. So yes, whenever we're launching, not for every product, this entire so-called demographics and psychographics change. So demographics is the larger pointers and psychographics is understanding their behaviors, needs and so on. So they will not completely change for a new product, but it will definitely change for a new series, a new product line, a new category or a new subcategory that you're launching. That is where the behaviors might change. Or sometimes when you're trying to break through a different price point, either you're dropping your price points and launching a sub brand or a collection or a series which is at a lower price point, or sometimes when you're trying to launch something in a higher price point, that's when the behaviors and needs of the consumers will completely change. Every time you're trying to do something new, launch a new product category, new price point, or launch a new subcategory, that's when you just don't have to discuss it in your boardrooms, but also to go out and talk to your consumers, study where they are, what are their behavioral patterns, psychographics, demographics, and thereby bring that data point to your product design, marketing platform, the choices of platforms, and thereby the choice of communication in terms of what you say, how you say, what language do you say that in, and thereby start drawing a communication pattern. And thereby we've seen, like a quick insight, we've seen in non-Hindi speaking parts of the country, people are very proud of their native language. And thereby, and they're very emotional about if there is a content that comes to them in their native language. While in a lot of Hindi speaking parts of the country, people aspire and connect with brands more that speak in English because there's a relatively higher aspiration for English. However, in other parts of the country, there's a lot of aspiration, a sense of belongingness for their own mother tongue. That's where we see, if you're launching a product, there's a lot of vernacular content that goes out so that consumers are able to relate to that. Now, that's something that sitting in a boardroom where everybody is speaking in English is an extremely counterintuitive thing, including if you're selling a 1,500 or 2,000 rupee or a high SP product. So initially our proposition was, when you're selling a high SP product, the language has to be absolutely English because you're speaking to India One. But it is not just about what language India One speaks in schools and colleges and at work, but it is also about what language do they relate to at heart when this India One speaks, which is in a lot of cases their own mother tongue. And that's where when we're speaking to some consumers in some parts of the country which are not Hindi speaking,
a lot of our content creation is in their language itself.
Bro, now I want to show you the website of Boult and I want to understand how all the study is being reflected on your website. Okay. So while you scroll through the screen, I'll just turn on screen recording so that the same thing can be shown to the editors. If you can help me understand. So if you can just walk me through your website and help me understand can you just pick one product, help me understand that this is the customer who's coming to my website and how he would go about choosing one product over the other. Let's start with a smartwatch because we've spoken enough about TWS. Let's go to smartwatch.
So I'll start with the communication. So here we have Saif Ali Khan, a brand ambassador at the top. Now, Saif Ali Khan epitomizes legacy, quality, aspiration because he's a Nawab. He comes from a certain affluence. He has symbolized quality, content, good quality acting, and thereby is a symbol of legacy, somebody who's sustained this for 30 years, and quality. Thereby instills a lot of trust and aspiration in a smartwatch buyer because somebody who's buying a smartwatch is not just buying functionality, but is also buying an aspiration, is also buying a piece of wearable fashion. And for that, the person more than a cricketer wants to relate to a Bollywood or a movie star who's more aspirational and somebody who sees him more as somebody that he can relate to or would want to look or behave like him. That's number one. Now we're walking through some of the products. So the first product is a new launch that we did, which is a curved screen, which is a 2.01 HD curved screen display. So now when we do launch our products, the idea is to do something very new in every launch that we do and not be clinging on to our older products and not be just want to be like, hey, I want to replicate or rip off an international brand or just figure out what's working with competition and just try to replicate that product. So you have to try to be ahead of the competition, and that's where we launched a curved screen, which is something that really looks great on your smartwatch. Now, this product is not somebody for an entry-level user, is not somebody who is buying a smartwatch for the first time. This is a product built for somebody who's buying a smartwatch for the second time. Because for the first time, a new user would buy a simple, most economically viable smartwatch because he wants to try this product. And when he's buying a new product, he would want to experiment with that. So something like this, which is Drift, which is the product here in the center of the screen, is more of a beginner's product because that's a more legacy, standard, square, rectangular shaped dial, which is a no-nonsense product, and he wants to experiment, does not want to experiment, he wants to try tested form factor, and he's buying that product. But now what you see on the right is a smartwatch which looks like a classic watch, looks more like a luxury watch. It's called Sterling Pro. Now this watch has knurling, which had a lot of aluminum and metal. The strap is metal. So the consumer here, this is meant for a relatively higher income group. People who do not want to buy it just for functionality, but also want to buy it for fashion, would want to buy it for the show off, for the aspiration. And thereby this person has a taste and understanding of what a luxury or a premium smartwatch would look like and would want to replicate that in a smartwatch.
Any particular age? Like, can you give me like which exactly is the minimum viable segment for this particular product?
So this product, which is Sterling Pro, would be not meant for students. Typically, a lot of our TG's target group is focused on students. However, this product, which is a metallic strap, is relatively for a higher age group, which is beyond 24 and 25. So Sterling Pro is a product which is meant for a higher age group from let's say 25 to 35 for multiple reasons. A is meant for people who relate to analog watches and who relate to classic watches. B, because of the metal strap, the age group moves from 15 to 25 to rather for 25 to 35. C, because it's relatively expensive. On the left, we see a 1399 product and this is a 1799 product. There's a 400 rupee premium, which is a very large premium for an e-commerce brand. So there, the consumer is willing to pay that premium, which means he's coming from a relatively higher income group and thereby is able to appreciate and is willing to pay a premium for the design, form factor and the metal strap, and thereby is willing to buy that product. So thus the income group, the behavior, the need of this customer is not just fitness, but is also aspiration because he's also willing to wear this at work. And in comparison to a new or a first time buyer who's a student, the income group is lesser, the age group is lesser, and this person could be more into fitness, could be more playing sports, could be measuring data more in comparison to this customer who's more fashion conscious, is more
older and has a higher age income group, and that is why he's buying this product.
Got it. Got it. So every product has a certain insight based on which the product is being launched. Because on the outside, it looks like you're just launching a lot of products, but you're saying that every product, every lineup has a certain target audience, and then everything from your promotion to your influencer marketing to your performance marketing, all of that is based on that insight that you gain from the minimum viable audience.
And thereby, for every launch, even the color material finish, because let's say if you're launching a product, let's say we have a Mirage, which is a blue and gold, we do understand the age group would be higher, income group would be higher, price point would be higher, and thereby the choice of product design, not just the marketing communication, the choice of platforms, if we are collaborating with influencers, the choice of influencers. So if you're selling a more fashion-led product like a Mirage that we see on our screen or a Sterling Pro, would not just be tech influencers, but would be fashion influencers. Because these are people who are more aspirational in terms of what they wear and consumers would want to buy. Because my fashion influencer recommended this is a great looking watch which I can wear it to work. So in comparison to a heavily loaded product, which is in terms of features, let's say an AMOLED screen that we see on Rover, which is an AMOLED screen, needs to be endorsed by somebody who understands this product category, which is a tech influencer. He can explain the difference between a typical TFT screen and AMOLED screen, can explain all the incremental functionality, can explain the sensors, and thereby can sell the upgraded features to a customer and not just upgraded aesthetics. So that's how not just the choice of product design, but a choice of platform, choice of communication, the language, the marketing, message, everything will change as per what the product category.
So minimum viable audience is absolutely important.
Absolutely.
Great. Bro, the next thing that I want to understand from you is okay, so before we dive into that, now when it comes to the features, because you roll it out by understanding the minimum viable audience, specifically when it comes to the audience that is paying a premium of 400 rupees, when it comes to these features like the feature of measuring calories, heartbeat and stuff like that, how accurate are your watches? Are they like on par with Apple, or there might be like a 10 to 20% margin of error here and there?
So when we initially launched, so typically most of the category and industry was typically sourcing products from China, and they were picking off sensors and products that were designed, and they were just simply rebranding it, labeling it, including their apps as well. So we were in our competition the last brand to launch smartwatches, because that was one thing that we were very, very particular about, that we have to launch a product which is that we're very sure about in terms of the hardware sensors. So we get into understanding what are the sensors used by top brands, what are the data points they're capturing, how are they capturing those data points, and thereby what is the software that goes behind in terms of interpreting their data points. So for example, you mentioned about calories. Calories is an inferred data point. So you get raw data points from your movement tracking with your heart rate. So that calculates distance. Heart rate captures, of course, how your heart is reacting to that movement in the body. And as a function of that, adding to the mass which your body has, which is your weight, we use all these three data points to interpret what your calories are. So now, which brings us to a lot of software capability. So we designed an in-house app. We got into the algorithms of understanding how these info data values are captured. How do we translate from a heartbeat to a calories? How do we translate heartbeat to sleeping patterns? To understand the sleep science, to understand what is deep sleep and what are the 3 stages of sleep, to capture a lot of these data points and to bring out a final product. So our products do not have a deviation for more than 1.5% to 2%. Now, of course, it's nearly impossible to produce a sensor which has 100% accuracy. Now, international or American brands would typically work at 99 to 101%, which means 1% plus or minus. Our products would be, let's say, 1.5%, maximum 2%. There will be no deviation. It will not be varying by a huge margin if you compare it to any international brand. Having said that, for us, it took us a lot of time to get the right sensors, change the hardware, and a lot of this came with a lot of extra cost and time and R&D, and thereby a lot of software understanding of algorithms. How are we able to process this information to give a more consumable piece of information to our user about sleeping patterns, about heart rate, about calories, which are more inferred values. So that's how we invested a lot of time. But once we were sure, our first product was a 4.5 star rated, which was the highest rated smartwatch
with 10,000 plus reviews. And that's how we've been able to maintain a 4 plus star rating on our smartwatches, including our audio products.
While it was very difficult to crack, it takes a lot of time, which brings me back to our DNA and process of designing products, that we work with limited products, but we really go deep, and we do not want to sell everything to everybody, but we want to build a very limited number of products, go deep, and then thereby to sell it to a limited audience to begin with, thereby scale it up within India, and thereby go global with that product.
Very interesting. Bro, my last question to you is about the barrier to entry. On the outside, it looks like, okay, smartwatch, features. And very few people will again go into the intricacies of what exactly is the value add of the feature that has been mentioned for that particular product. And from what I read from the reports in the industry, a lot of people say that this is even today a commoditized market where irrespective of the brand, people will still choose the features and the price and look for value for money on paper, regardless of whether that translates into real value or not. They will simply look at evident value on paper and then choose a particular product over the other. So my question is, today if somebody wants to enter this market, they can simply white label a product, acquire a few MOQs, acquire a few batch of products from the manufacturers, put a label on top of it, hire celebrities to promote these products, and that's it. The brand will be out there, it will drive enough traffic, and eventually it will start generating sales. Now, whether or not it makes a profit, that's a different question altogether. But if they can simply put those features on paper, and we all know that most of us do not use all of those features, and if they only look at a few 3 or 4 top features and they try to deliver as much value in such a way that the customer feels that he's getting value, then I think they've done a fairly good job to establish themselves as a brand. Now, my question is, if tomorrow a brand like this pops up with 1,000 crore funding with them, what is stopping this brand from becoming Boult?
Very good question. And that's what we get asked in most of the deeper conversations with potential investors or people who understand the landscape and ecosystem. And we're often quoted this example of how smartphones as an industry functioned. There was not a lot of R&D, a lot of initial Indian smartphone brands like of Micromax, Lava, etc. While some have sustained that wave, and some of them have been completely wiped off, and investors have lost a lot of money in that process. Where they were trading a product, there was not enough value add, not enough R&D, not enough brand building, and thereby there was a larger player, both Chinese or American or Korean, where they came in with larger R&D capability, larger, deeper pockets, marketing funds, and they completely wiped off the Indian brands because the Indian brands were not really adding value. So the entire barrier to entry is built around the construct of how much value do you add. Now, value is not just cost or pricing, but value could be added in terms of your R&D capability, the product design, the aesthetics, or it could be also around the brand that you are as a brand. Now, a lot of categories, let's say including footwear, fashion, or even technology players, the supply ecosystems are fairly large enough for anybody to pick up a product from the OEM of even Apple for that matter. Now, having said that, there are some contract manufacturing partners who work with the best of smartphone brands in the US, including Apple, including some Korean, Japanese brands. But it is not about getting the right suppliers or right contract manufacturers or, and so on and so forth. It is about understanding how much value do you add in that process. So, which means how much of a brand building that you've done in terms of, so if you want to counter a great product, you need to have a great brand. If you're countering a great brand and if you are a newer player, you need to build a great product with a lot of focus and attention. Now, we look at our competition, let's say, from 2 lenses or barrier to entry for 2 kinds of brand audiences. One is newer players and newer startups. And let's put the second bucket into very large players, which are institutional players, billion-dollar houses, or somebody with 500 crore or 1,000 crore funding, right? So when we look at smaller players, they might be willing to go to a new supplier. They might be willing to cut corners in terms of the products. They will not have the R&D capability, or they will not have the brand building, which means they might build a cheaper product. They might communicate it rightly to the consumer, but they might sell the first few units. But because they would not have enough attention to detail, enough focus, enough R&D, that product will fail in the longer run, which means as the ratings and reviews will start coming, they might be able to fudge the first few hundred reviews and ratings, but beyond that it will not sustain, which means they will be coming, and there are a lot of players who launch, smaller players who launch a product, pick up a product from any other country, China, India, etc., trade it, white label it, sell it. They're able to sell good numbers because they're able to drop prices, they're able to beat the prices of larger players, but they move out or are wiped out because they're not able to build a great quality product, and they might be willing to fudge reviews up till a certain level, but beyond that, the real ratings and reviews will come in. Product will become a 3.5 star product, and it will be wiped off. After which their CACs will completely shoot up, profitability will go down, they will have bad stocks, bad debts, and so on. Now, and even if they're able to build a relatively good product, they will not be able to match that brand image. So either it has to be a great product or a brand. So in this case, they will not be able to match the trust that a consumer has in a brand which has 7 years of legacy like ours, which is rated the number one rated brand in the country, and so on. Now, if you compare it to a larger institution which has 500 crores or 1,000 crores worth of funding, and there have been multi-billion-dollar houses which have also invested into this category, either coming from mobility background or coming from another category, which is, let's say, FMCG and so on, where they want to utilize a very large conglomerate brand name in the country and they want to ride onto that goodness. Now, they would have a brand name, but either because they're doing a lot of things, they might not have razor sharp focus on investing into a category in terms of R&D. They might be hiring a team, building a team, but it will be too widespread, because when a larger institution is investing, they would invest into multiple categories. Audio as a category, for example, for smartphones, smartphone companies have launched an audio arm and a smartwatch arm, but they would only do 2 to 3 SKUs in every category. They will not be as fast as innovation with them. They will not launch a lot of SKUs, multiple variants, multiple colors. They would not invest too much of time to understand a consumer, because larger groups or international houses would have international markets, different geographies, different price points. They will not customize the product for Indian audiences and so on. So thus larger groups have not been able to crack this in spite of multiple attempts, because you need a lot of focus for a limited market, a specialized R&D team, and you have to build a great product for this market, which requires a lot of attention. And you need to have that patience to build that revenue, to build that market. So no matter if you put 500 crores or 1,000 crores, you will bleed a lot of money for a year or two, and you will be able to acquire customers, but these will not be loyal customers because your product will not be ready for that scale. So it takes a lot of time to build a product that is ready for that scale. And that's why we were consciously or unconsciously very slow in the initial part of that journey, because you have to take some time to master that product. While funds will be able to help you in bleeding money, acquiring customers by using a lot of marketing, but your product will not be ready. So that's why sometimes lack of funds feels like a weakness, as you mentioned, but it becomes the biggest strength, because that allows you to slowly and steadily master your product and master your art in building that product.
Perfect. Bro, last question. Can you walk me through the unit economics of any of your products? Let's take watch and TWS.
Yep.
Okay, can you walk me through the unit economics of a watch? And I'll tell you why I'm asking you this question, because I want to understand where exactly is the maximum cost that's going. And as you mentioned before, a lot of money could go into performance marketing. And when we see a lot of Shark Tank startups which have generated revenues on the upwards of 12 crores, 13 crores, on the outside it looks like wow. And then once you break down their economics, you understand that 40 to 50% of the revenue is just going into performance marketing. And then when you look at the repeat rates, if they are too less, you understand that this boom has come as a result of first-time buyers because of performance marketing and not because of loyal customers buying that again and again, which eventually says that the customer lifetime value will drop. So can you help me with your unit economics and help me understand what is a good unit economics and what is bad unit economics?
Makes sense. So firstly, I want to break the myth where people think, and there are stories and reels that come and tell you that, hey, the iPhone that you're buying for ₹1 lakh is not manufactured for more than 35,000 rupees, and that's why I should buy a Chinese brand which is making the same product selling the same product at 50,000 rupees, right? But so consumers possibly, while of course people who are young founders, entrepreneurs, students, working professionals, they understand that there is a lot more that goes to the entire cost breakdown than the COGS, which is the product manufacturing cost. So thereby there comes an element of 18% tax. There is an import cost for any raw material that you source from outside India. There is a human capital cost. which is a variable cost. There is a capital infrastructure cost that you set up a factory, a machinery. There is R&D cost, which is also sort of a capital cost, which is a capital infrastructure cost, because not every R&D investment will lead to a final product.
Okay, hold on. Manufacturing cost mein in COGS, aren't we considering raw material as a part of COGS?
Yes.
So raw material is a part of COGS, right?
Of course, 100%.
Okay, and on top of that, there is R&D. There is
So sometimes people consider the COGS exclusive of taxes, inclusive of customs.
okay.
But depends on the definition.
So it's a little subjective, you're saying.
Exactly. So there could be a COGS without taxes and without import duties, but assuming there is a raw cost of the product, then you have 18% GST, not as a percentage of the manufacturing, but as a percentage of the retail value. So if let's say there is a 1,000 rupee product, which is manufactured at 500 rupees, the tax is not on 500 rupees, it is taxed on the 1,000 rupee value, which is 18% in our category, which is 150 rupees is a percentage of 1,000. So whenever you're buying a 1,000 rupee product, there is a 150 rupee tax element. And thereby there is, as I said, there is human capital cost, product cost, there's investment into molds for building a certain product. There is lastly and most importantly, marketing cost. And there is a last cost, which is leakages, which is some backup that you create for bad debt, bad stock, for returns, for after sales, maintenance of the product, for running a customer service, and so on and so forth. So as a mature business, we need to incorporate all of these costs, including the cost of capital as well. Now, when there are new brands or new companies, in their maturity, sometimes in our category, in every category, they think, hey, I see a product on Amazon selling for 1,000 rupees. And I see that the manufacturing cost is anywhere between 350 to 450 rupees. And they see, hey, I have a gold mine. I have a 650 rupees margin that I can earn in and I can take care of all the costs. But that's not true. Because when you sell a product on Amazon for 1,000 rupees, there's a 20-25% margin taken by the platform, depending on the category. It could be 15%, could be less than that as well. In some fashion and high margin categories, it could be higher. For a 1,000 rupee product, which is not volumetrically big, the shipping cost could be between 50 to 75 rupees. Now, thereafter, there is the marketing cost, which is in most of the cases the biggest cost. So to sell a product on Amazon or D2C, you need to run performance marketing ads. So to sell one product, you might have to invest anywhere between 10 to 25% of marketing cost. Especially in case of D2C, that marketing cost is up to 30, 40, 50, 60% as well. And now there is a brand marketing cost, because there is a certain marketing cost you're incurring towards selling a certain product, but you're also investing into brand building, where you were buying media on platforms, you were using communication with influencers, you're talking about the brand more than a product, and so on. Then comes taxes, which is taxes I already mentioned, which is 15%. Then we come to R&D cost, investment into molds, investment into people. Now that's one thing that people miss, because when we're a smaller 3-member, 5-member business, the cost of teams is much lesser, cost of R&D is much lesser. But thereafter, once you start scaling up beyond a certain size, you need to start building teams. You need to start delegating your work to people who can do this job better than you. That's when the employee cost will come down to up to, let's say, 5%, 3% of the product cost. And finally, you have a 5% backup for cost of capital, because typically when you sell a product on Amazon, you might get the payment anywhere between 30 to 45 days later. You will have to hold some stock. Some stocks will go bad. There will be some bad debts, bad payments, bad products, bad shipments. So you will have to keep a minimum buffer of 5 to 10%. And especially if you're dealing in an e-commerce platform, there will be a lot of returns, which is returns management cost. That's one thing that people, when they start selling a product on Amazon or any other e-commerce platform, including D2C, they do not factor in that about 10% returns that it will get. So for 100 rupee transaction that you do, or 100 units that you sell, 10 or maybe even 15 products will come back. And thereby the cost of acquiring those customers is also gone as a bad debt. So there's a huge list of costs that comes, and including some financial costs and so on and so forth. There's a huge list of costs that go down, and finally you're left with a minuscule of EBITDA, which is your earning before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So that's where you have to make sure, if you're selling a product at 1,000 rupees, it has to be manufactured at less than 450 rupees, because there will be a lot of other costs that will come into picture. And when you see a product which is being sold at a price, at least there's a thumb rule that the manufacturing cost to the retail cost should be anywhere between 2 to 3x.
If you are less than that, which means if you are at 1.5x, 1.75 or 1x, you cannot sustain in that market. In fashion and high margin categories, that multiple could be 3 to 5x, which means if you're selling a shirt for 1000 rupees, the cost of manufacturing cost has to be under 250 rupees, because there the marketing cost will be easily about 25%. And the marketplace margins or the distributor channel margins will also be very, very high.
Okay. So for marketing, when it comes to the wearable space, you're saying that out of 1000 rupees, 450 rupees goes into just manufacturing. Then marketing cost would be
About 15%,
15.
10 to 15%.
Okay. So that's about 100 to 150 rupees.
Yes.
And what about the platform fees?
Which will be about 20%.
20%. Do we have any other costs that we have to consider? Like you mentioned, a long list, right?
Yes.
So what all do we have to consider? now?
So taxes are 15%, 18%, but as a percentage of the selling price, it will be 15%. So 1000 rupee product will have 150 rupees worth of taxes. We'll have marketing cost of 100 to 150 rupees. We'll have marketplace margins of about 200 rupees. Then it will have a returns management cost of 50 rupees, which is 5%. Because a lot of returns will come in, consumers will buy the product, will return it. There'll be open box returns that you cannot use and so on. There'll be cost of running after sales service through call centers, through third party partnerships or your own service centers. And then you will be left with employee cost, which is again possibly anywhere between 2.5% to 5%, depending on the industry and brands. And then finally you're left with whatever all of these costs plus EBITDA or plus the COGS
Plus
minus.
the COGS. So manufacturing cost is COGS, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we have manufacturing cost of 450 rupees, marketing cost of 100 to 150 rupees, platform fees of 200 to 250 rupees, taxes which will be in the range of 150 to 180 rupees, return management of 50 rupees, after sales service will be included in the return management.
Yes. You can take that 5 to 7.5%.
Okay. And then you have employee cost of 2.5 to 5%. Does that kind of summarize our unit economics, or do we have any other?
Ballpark, I mean, as I said, you could also consider brand marketing and not just product marketing.
Oh wow. Can we just quickly differentiate brand marketing from product marketing?
So product marketing is, or let's say called performance marketing, that the amount of money that you invest to sell one product, which is for performance of that product. But beyond that, typically brands, if you are, let's say, over a size of 100 crores, it is recommended to do some brand marketing as well, which means you want to build a brand, you would want to invest on the brand. And thereby brand marketing would typically be between 2.5% to 10%, depending on what's the brand budget in terms of the brand marketing.
2.5 to 10%.
Yes, there are brands, especially in case of fashion as a category, that number sometimes goes into double digits as well.
You seem to be very interested in fashion. By the way.
So I want to draw this analogy because electronics and fashion are very, very contrasting categories. So electronics, the COGS as a percentage of sales is very high and marketing cost is relatively lower. While in fashion, the COGS is less than 20%, 25%, and the marketing cost and retail costs are very, very, very high. So thus I want to give a perspective, because people, when they are consumers or our viewers who are watching this, might not want to build a business model around electronics only. I want to draw a structure which is across categories.
That is beautiful, man. So you are telling me that there is manufacturing cost, marketing cost, platform fees, tax, return management, after sales, employee cost, and brand marketing. All of that consists of unit economics that actually come together to give you the unit economics. And the manufacturing cost is perhaps the simplest of all, right?
And
because your employees will come and go.
Yeah.
Marketing budget will fluctuate with each passing season, each passing campaign, each passing messaging that you design. Taxes will obviously remain the same because Modi ji is very stable in that case. Then you have return management, which is again, if you launch a bad product and it turns out to be faulty, return management is a nightmare. And when it comes to after sales also, automatically the load will come on after sales if you launch a bad product. So obviously everything is fluctuating except for manufacturing cost, because it is simply machines designing a product. Very interesting. Thank you so much, bro. This has been very, very insightful. And I often say this to a lot of my guests, because all of my guests are so kind and so open about everything that they've done, that I again have 3 to 4 pages of notes, and you have given me everything from unit economics to the philosophy of bootstrap businesses to the difficulty of building a bootstrap business. You've also thrown a lot of light on fashion, which was quite unexpected. And we also delved deeper into the minimum viable audience part, which is again a very fundamental philosophy that more often than not people miss out on. which then helps you drive better decisions. And I'm sure that if somebody is watching this, Parth told me that ऐसा सवाल पूछना कि कल अगर जाके अपने को बोल्ट जैसा कोई कंपनी खड़ी करनी पड़े तो अपने को पता होना चाहिए कि क्या क्या करना चाहिए और कैसे कैसे करना चाहिए. And from this, what I can sense is that two things. Number one, it's not so easy to build a brand like yours. Number two, it's not easy to build a bootstrap business. And number three, and most importantly, although the procedure looks pretty straightforward through this conversation, after this conversation, I wouldn't dare to do something like this because I can sense that there are complexities which are beyond my imagination, more importantly, not in my control. And when that scales to a large extent, we understand that there has to be an incredible system at the foundation, which will take at least 4 to 5 years to build, considering the fact that the market doesn't evolve very, very quickly. And if the market evolves, your systems have to change, which brings in more difficulty, more complications. And if one thing goes wrong, considering the margin at which you operate, which is less than 10%, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Less than 10% margin when you're operating, you have very less scope for error.
Very less margin for error.
And here, if you end up messing up with your systems, you will either need a lot of funding to help you survive. And even with a lot of funding, if you don't get your systems right, if you don't evolve your systems, you're going to go out of business.
Yes.
So after this conversation, as much as I'm inspired, I will also not dare to start a company like this because it's better to make great YouTube videos and case studies.
No, I'd beg to differ. While when people, they do understand or see a large business or a complex business model, they tend to get scared and petrified about this. To be honest, when we started this business, we did not have huge amount of insight. We did not have access to so much of information for get capital. We did not have as much experience while I'd run 3 startups before Boult. But all of that had helped me figure out smaller hows of how to build my next business. But Boult was the first electronic product that I was building, was the first hardware product that I was building. So as much as it looks complicated, I would not want people to be discouraged from not just Boult launching another Boult tomorrow. I would urge urge our viewers to possibly start something like this. In fact, I'd love to partner with them, maybe fund them in any capacity or support them in any capacity, be it electronics, be it audio products, be it smartwatches, or be it anything else. And it is about getting the basics right. It is about solving the right problems. And we spoke about, figuring out what your differentiator is, figuring out your customer, looking at a smaller audiences, not trying to solve for everything, not trying to make a very large complex model with 10 pages, but to solve one step at a time. And then in that process, you gradually evolve. And by the time you might have figured that you solve a problem, the problem might change, the TG might change, the product might change. But it is a constant evolution that you have to go through. So by the time our viewers will start building something, the ecosystem would have changed, the AI would have changed something, the supply would have changed, the regulation and policy would have changed, the world and the ecosystem will completely change. But the change is the biggest inevitable. So we have to keep on working on it.
So you're saying that fundamentally, if you're a legendary entrepreneur who's hands-on with the company, you will eventually discover everything, even if you don't know anything when you just start.
You don't need to be a legendary entrepreneur to begin with. You just need the right spirit, some ability to learn and improvise, and then just keep on learning and improvising, and then you will slowly and steadily keep on mastering your art of building a product or a company.
Wonderful, bro. This was amazing. Thank you so much. You spent 4.5 hours with us.
Is it? I never realized.
With a lot of interruptions here and there. But
what I also realized, and I'd like to mention this, and I'm not trying to flatter you, but this is my first podcast with a founder and somebody who comes from a entrepreneurial business background, somebody who's understood business and studied it. I enjoyed this conversation because it was not just a one-sided interview. Typically, most of the other podcasts that I go to are a list of questions that people should shoot at us, and then we just keep on answering them. It feels like a monologue. But here, it felt like a dialogue because you are an entrepreneur yourself, you're a founder, you understand the business and the nuances. You sort of dug information out of me. You really got deep inside and dived deeper into topics, and I really enjoyed thoroughly. And this sort of depth, I wouldn't have gotten into a discussion possibly in months and years, apart from our deeper discussions in our boardrooms. But possibly outside that, this is the deepest conversation that I'm having about business, consumers, startups, and the philosophy around it. So I totally loved it, thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you so much for having me, Ganesh.
Thank you so much, man. This really means a lot.